This might be my favourite whiskey of the year, and there's still a few months left before this year ends, so you know this is a good whiskey. This week, let me tell you about the peated, ported whiskey from Killowen. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Matt, I'm the whiskey nerd, and like I said, this is the kind of peated, ported whiskey from Killowen. So let me get it into the glass and I'll tell you a little bit more about it. Now, it doesn't really have its own name because Killowen don't really name their whiskies, at least not yet, because they're still releasing single barrels of whiskey. So this is barrel KD202. It is what you might call a pot still whiskey in future, but it is currently just a mixed mash bill whiskey that was turfed or peated, so it has a nice bit of smoke coming through it, and it was aged in a port cask. Now, one thing about Killowen, they do call this series of releases the Barantúil. Barantúil kind of means authentic, true to the original, because they're using old styles of mash bills in their whiskey. If you aren't familiar with Killowen Distillery, they're a great little, I suppose micro isn't the word, you can say extra micro distillery in Ireland. They are a tiny little operation running out of a shed, but they have huge passion for making great whiskies. I'll put a picture of their distillery up there, but if you look up online, you will see so much love for their whiskey because they're really putting a lot of effort into making great whiskey. And like I said, they've got a lot of kind of history behind them. So in their kind of whiskey boxes like this, they do have these little sheets of paper which give you loads more information about the distillation process. They show you the mash bill, exactly how much malted barley, smoked malted barley, unmalted barley, oats, wheat and rye went into the whiskey. They also tell you about where it was kind of distilled, where it was fermented, where the grains were milled, where they were malted. It gives you all this kind of whiskey nerd info, and as a whiskey nerd I really love that. They even tell you about these stills, the wash still and the spirit still, how full those stills were when the whiskey was going through them, so you know if it was a big run or a small run, and that can influence the flavour of the whiskey. This here isn't it is a single barrel because it was a single port finish at the end, but it is originally a mix of Killowen Casks 19, which was filled the 28th of August 2019, and Cask 44, which was filled on 12th of February of 2020. They kind of were aged in ex-bourbon casks, and then they were finished for 6 months in a really, really fresh tawny port cask, and you can really see the influence. I'm not sure if it's coming through on camera, but that is bright red. It's not pink the way you get with some kind of port cask finishes. It is bright red. I saw some kind of notes online that the distiller they were kind of afraid that the port cask had too much influence when they saw the color of this whiskey, but it hasn't had too much influence. It has had so much good influence to the whiskey. And yeah, I'm gonna say one thing about this release. You can't get this whiskey anymore. This sold out almost immediately on their website, and on the channel I tend not to review whiskies that are super limited in nature, that by the time I have the video filmed, edited, uploaded and out into the world, the whiskey will be gone. But I also have a kind of a rule that if I want to include a whiskey on the end of year kind of wrap up of my top 5 whiskies of the year, I do have to have reviewed the whiskey in the year. So that's why I'm reviewing this whiskey, even if you can't get it. Now, that said, Killowen have got those port casks still in their operation. They are still distilling. So it's very likely in the future, as more and more of their whiskies come onto the market, that you will be able to get a bottle, maybe not from this cask, but a very similar cask with a similar kind of mash bill. This whiskey, when it was released, it got a huge amount of love in the world, more than I think Killowen normally get. So I think they're going to try and recreate it or do something very similar. So in the future, if you like the sound of this whiskey, definitely keep an eye out for Killowen releases, because this is a fantastic little drop. And now that I've kind of spoiled one of the whiskies on my end of year wrap up, I think it's time we go in for the nose on this whiskey. Oh, and one final note, this does come in at 56.05% alcohol by volume, because Killowen are all about transparency. honesty and giving you cask strength whiskey, which you can dilute down if you feel the need to, but I personally think this at cask strength is a lovely little whiskey. Let's go in for the nose. Okay, you get a lot of the peat up front, but if you're not the biggest fan of peat, like you might like this whiskey, you might not like this whiskey, because that port cask, it had a huge impact on here. The peat that you can sometimes get can be a bit acrid, a bit sharp, a bit rough around the edges. The peat here it's kind of like wrapped around or wrapped within kind of like strawberry jam, blackberry jam, really deep red fruits in there, and that kind of has softened the peat. You still get that core of smoke, you get that core of weighty, smoky peat in the whiskey, but it's kind of wrapped up. All those sharp edges, all those kind of harsh notes you can sometimes get in peat have been kind of muted down. You still get a core smoke, but it's just so fruity and so rich, and also really nice and spicy. Almost like a white pepper note on the whiskey. Like it would, like with pot still whiskey, normally you get a really deep kind of heavy, almost black pepper. This is a bit lighter, a bit more white pepper, maybe a touch of ginger in there, as well as some really just nice kind of lighter floral notes. I mean, as I said, this whiskey has wheat and rye and oats in it, so you're going to get some of those florally notes. You're going to get some of those more earthy notes coming in, as well as those kind of more traditional whiskey notes you get on the nose. I could just sit here for ages nosing this whiskey. There's so much to enjoy. There's like almost like a creamy note coming through, like kind of strawberries and cream, but also at the same time you've got that smoky note coming through, that spicy note from the kind of pot still influence, and just a really, really lovely whiskey to nose. And like I said, this is cask strength, 56.05%. That's what, 112 proof. This is not hot on the nose. It's a little warm on the palate, which I'll get to in a second, but it's not hot on the nose. You can really get in there and just enjoy how sweet and almost savory but smoky this whiskey is. So let's go in for the palate. Cheers. It's dense, it is heavy, it is rich, it's almost syrupy, but kind of more like a creamy custard, where you get that kind of flavor that just coats your whole mouth. You get all that smoke that from the nose that was promised, all that kind of really heavy duty core of peat, but then that fruitiness rides on top of that. You get, like I said, that core of sweetness, the core of smokiness, and that rich sweetness kind of surrounding it. You get so much flavor, but also, like I said, that kind of creamy note, the strawberries and cream for the nose, that's definitely coming through into the palate. Much more spiciness on the kind of palate than on the nose. The nose got a little bit of like lighter, maybe black, maybe white pepper, maybe a little bit of like ginger notes coming through. On the palate though, much more spicy. So I'm gonna go in again and see if I can find more about those spices. Cheers. Yeah, it's still peppery. It's not maybe a full, well, it's a little bit black pepper. If you're familiar with the flavor of like Sichuan pepper, that kind of Chinese pepper, where you get that little kind of tingling on your tongue when you taste it, it's that kind of pepperiness. It's not super deep or dark. It's not really light. It's almost like kind of floral, kind of tingly, and that's probably coming through from that rye, from the oats, from the wheat in the mash bill, just giving you a really nice, deep, dense, very kind of just enjoyable whiskey. The heat of the ABV, 56.05%, pretty high. Not super high, not 60s, but still pretty darn high. You don't really feel it. Like, you can definitely feel the warmth. You can feel the hug of the whiskey kind of going down your throat as you taste it. Definitely warm, spreads out, but it is not hot. It's not like burning the palate off you. It lets you enjoy everything in that whiskey, and then means you can really enjoy the finish. And speaking of the finish, it's time we go in for the finish. Cheers. Okay, so like I said, up front on the palate, smoke, sweet, fruity, jammy, creamy, but then that peppery spice, that kind of Sichuan-y peppery spice, the tingle on your tongue, that kind of rises up as those other notes kind of fade into the background. They don't disappear, they kind of just sit lower down, where on the tip of my tongue, I'm getting that light kind of tingly, peppery heat from that whiskey, that pot still spice coming through. It's a long finish. It's a rich finish. It kind of fades off and then just lingers. It has this huge explosion as soon as it hits your palate. Big, massive, weighty, fruity, smoky hit, and then just kind of lingers on a little bit. That spice is there. It's kind of underneath the fruit, and it just lingers on as well. You get the spiciness kind of lingering on, probably longer, I'd say, as I'm talking, as I'm breathing. Yeah, the spice lingers on longer than the fruity notes. The smoke is still there. Peat does tend to hang around a little bit. But yeah, that nice spicy note lingers on into the end. It just really makes you want to take another sip, take another glass maybe of this really tasty whiskey and just kind of enjoy it some more. So I think that's all there is to say about this really great whiskey. You'll be seeing it again in a little while at the end of the year. If you've tried any whiskies from Killowen, let me know down in the comments what your favorite so far has been, because they are producing some very good, really good whiskies. And while you're there, maybe let me know if you want to see videos like this in the future where I review these whiskies that probably aren't going to be easy for you to find. They might not be sold in your region, they might not be available, or they might have been single casks with only 476 bottles ever made. So if you want to see videos like that where it's whiskies that maybe you won't be able to find but you might be able to get a flavour for the distillery, let me know. Or if you prefer whiskies that you are definitely going to be able to find, let me know too. Me though, I put out whiskey reviews on Wednesdays. I put out cocktail recipes featuring whiskey on Fridays, but right now I'm just really going to enjoy this glass of Killowen. And I'll see you next time. Sláinte.